Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today, and it's great to see you all in person and those of you on the phone as well. I know that all of us here at CHA have a number of different roles, and many folks on the phone and elsewhere work to help people enroll into a lot of the Marketplace programs, Child Health Plus, Medicaid, and the Marketplace Qualified Health Plans, or QHPs. And we're going to talk about those today, and basically at any point in time, somebody who gets one of these programs may end up needing to transition from the Marketplace type programs into the Medicare and Medicare-related programs. And they're two different systems, and there can be a lot of confusion and complications related to transitioning between them. And so our roles, both as navigators and as post-enrollment advocates, are to help clients move between the programs when the time requires it. So really quickly, we're going to take questions at the end. But if something, especially folks here in the room, if something comes up that you have an immediate question, you want to just interrupt me if it's directly related to something on the slide, just let me know. But otherwise, we'll take a bunch of questions at the end and move through this probably more quickly than ideal, just because there's so much information here. But we'll just go through each point. One note about the Medicare and the Small Business Health Options Marketplace, or SHOP. We have some more materials on that, and it's in the set of slides. We may be able to get to some of it, but we're not sure. So we will go through primarily the marketplaces and individual qualified health plans and how they relate to Medicare, as well as Magi, or Marketplace, Modified Adjusted Gross Income, Magi Medicaid, and Medicare, and the importance of enrolling into Medicare and the different parts of it when first eligible. And I'm going to go through the first section of the presentation, and then my colleague Beth Scheiken will take over for the second section. So we all help different types of families, different groups of people, and say a family comes to your office, and 2 or 3 of them, maybe they're enrolling in Marketplace coverage, but then there's this guy named Raymond, and he's 67, and well, we're sorry for you, Raymond, but you don't actually live in Nebraska anymore, because New York's so much better, we're going to move you to New York. So he lives in New York, and this is a case example that at the end of this presentation, you should be able to answer all those questions, or at least feel more confident. So he's 67, he lives in New York, has original Medicare Part A hospital coverage and Part B prescription or outpatient medical coverage, and he also has a prescription drug plan and a Medigap to pay the cost that Medicare doesn't cover if you have original Medicare. So Raymond has Medicare Part A hospital coverage for free, and that means that he doesn't have to pay a very large premium, which can be costly and also a determinant about whether or not somebody who's eligible for Medicare would qualify for other programs. So in this case, the vast majority of people who turn 65 don't have to pay a premium for Part A, including Raymond. So here's about the marketplaces on TV, and he thinks he needs to change his coverage, and he calls one of us and asks a couple questions. Do I need to disenroll from Medicare and switch to a marketplace plan? Do I need to change or add to my coverage because of the marketplaces? And as we all know, the marketplaces are private competitive marketplaces for people to shop for different health insurance plans, either through qualified health plans or Medicaid. So why wouldn't Medicare plans be in them? Well, I don't know, but they aren't. So are private Medicare plans in the marketplaces now? We're going to talk about that because they aren't. So the marketplaces, you all know this. This is total review. They're competitive marketplaces where you can shop for individual market insurance through qualified health plans, apply for and enroll in tax credits, advanced premium tax credits, APTCs, and reduced cost sharing in some of those plans. And there's also the Small Business Health Options Program, or SHOP QHPs. Add to the layer of confusion that SHOP plans are also called QHPs, but we'll just call them SHOP today. And we're going to talk about the movement of people from the marketplaces to Medicare. So for people who don't have Medicare, and let's say hypothetically the person doesn't have any insurance at all, they can get QHP coverage if they don't qualify for Medicaid. So in New York, that's if you're above 138% of the poverty level. and if they don't have other coverage and have an income between 100 and 400% of the federal poverty level. Those are the criteria for receiving tax credits through the marketplaces. You also can't have other coverage. You can't have Medicare Part A. You can't have most Medicaid. And as always with all of our work, there are a lot of exceptions to these rules. But for the most part, these are the criteria for qualifying for qualified health plan tax credits. Again, this is review for all of you, but starting January 1st, the Affordable Care Act requires us all to maintain what's called minimum essential coverage, which is known colloquially as the individual mandate for health insurance. Minimum essential coverage includes Medicare Part A, Medicaid, and pretty much any type of coverage you could get through your employer. It also includes qualified health plans or QHPs. People who don't have minimum essential coverage in any month or any couple months out of the year, who don't meet an exception like they're below the filing threshold for income taxes, they have to pay a fee with their income taxes next April. One more. Oh, no, that's on another slide. So do they affect Medicare, the marketplaces? Not really. What they do affect, what the marketplaces do affect with regard to Medicare is what happens once people become eligible for Medicare, because the marketplaces provide a place for folks to get coverage if they aren't Medicare eligible and they didn't have opportunities through an employer or through other means. Before the Affordable Care Act, these options weren't available, and so people who are new to marketplace options are going to be participating in a new set of coverage options and financial savings programs that are difficult enough to navigate on their own, even if you're still within them. But then people are also going to be new to these programs, and they're going to move to a new type of coverage, to Medicare, if they turn 65 or they're disabled and collecting disability for long enough. So that's where we come in. In addition, the marketplaces versus Medicare, if there's one key thing, or a couple of the key things I hope people can take away from this presentation, it's that they have overlapping annual enrollment periods, but those two overlapping enrollment periods are distinct. So the Medicare annual enrollment period is always, well, last several years, it's always October 15th through December 7th. It ends December 7th. This is when people can make changes to their Medicare health and drug coverage. They can move from one Medicare Part D prescription drug plan to another. They can move from a Medicare Advantage plan to a different Medicare Advantage plan. That's an HMO that delivers Medicare benefits. They can move from a Medicare Advantage HMO type arrangement into original fee-for-service Medicare. They can make all these changes between October 15th and December 7th. Anything that they elect to change will take effect January 1st of 2015. The marketplace's annual open enrollment period, it is much longer. This year it's much longer. It begins November 15th, and it goes through February 15th of 2015. Also, like the Medicare open enrollment period, the marketplace's open enrollment has coverage. Any coverage changes or elections you make for marketplace programs would take effect no sooner than January 1st, 2015. But they're distinct, and people with Medicare need to use Medicare's enrollment period, not knowing that your enrollment period for Medicare ends on December 7th is not an excuse for, trying to get some sort of special enrollment right after it ends. So people with Medicare in the marketplaces. This kind of goes back to Raymond a little bit, this slide, because he's 67, he already has Medicare, and now that he's moved to New York, he still has Medicare, but for some reason he thinks he needs to go to the marketplace. Well, he shouldn't. You shouldn't drop your qualified health or your Medicare coverage to go into a qualified health plan. It's also illegal for the issuer of a qualified health plan or an insurance broker or an agent or customer service representative of the health insurance marketplace to sell a QHP to somebody who has any part of Medicare, to somebody they know has any part of Medicare. Finally, even hypothetically, if the person could have gotten into a QHP while they had any part of Medicare, this includes if they have Part A only or if they only have Part B. It doesn't matter, any part. They wouldn't qualify for marketplace savings programs, so advanced premium tax credits. So a QHP would be very expensive for them. There are very limited exceptions to these rules, which we may talk about in the question and answers at the end. Leon, I know you emailed me the other week about a recently released frequently asked questions from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, about the marketplaces in Medicare. So there are some more kind of nitty-gritty, very detail-specific resources for people, for the very limited number of people who fall into exceptions to some of these rules. I'm always happy to answer questions about them. I have those resources and can share them with you if you want them. But generally speaking, if you have Medicare, the marketplaces are not for you, and our jobs as advocates are to help people move from the marketplaces to Medicare, or otherwise if their coverage situation requires them to move between different types of coverage. So more along those lines, Medicare provides the most cost-effective coverage for the vast majority of people. So even if somebody doesn't qualify for Part A for free, well, or let's say they get free Part A, because 98% of people do, 99% of people do. They get Part A for free, that's hospital coverage. They get Part B, medical coverage, for $104 a month. And a Part D plan might cost $30 a month. Plus, you get a supplemental Medigap plan for $200 a month. That's 200 plus 104. That's 304. Add 30 for a drug plan. You're at about $350 for somebody with Medicare. That's a monthly charge, and because people with Medicare who are eligible to get Part A for free don't qualify for the tax credits in a qualified health plan, especially for somebody who's elderly, a qualified health plan could be $600, $700 a month without the tax credits or more. So it's a pretty clear-cut situation that you want to go with Medicare. As far as the requirement to maintain minimum essential coverage, having Medicare Part A fulfills that requirement. You don't have to pay a tax penalty to the IRS if you have Part A. You can have Part A and Part B and also meet this requirement. Having Part B alone does not meet the requirement to maintain minimum essential coverage. Very few people fall into the category of folks who will have Part B but not Part A. But if you have somebody, give me a call. So these transitions from Medicare to a qualified health plan, or from a qualified health plan to Medicare, they're a little tricky and they require a couple different action steps on the part of our clients. So if somebody has a qualified health plan and they are becoming eligible for Medicare, they need to enroll into Medicare Part A, Part B, and Part D during their Medicare initial enrollment period, which is the 7 months. I know I mentioned this at the training 2 months ago, but it's the initial enrollment. It's 7 months, 3 months before the month you become eligible for Medicare, the month of, and 3 months after you become eligible. So while it's 7 months long, the first 3 months are the most important. So if somebody's becoming eligible for Medicare, they want to enroll into Part A, Part B, and Part D, hospital, medical, and prescription drug, during those first 3 months so they can get coverage effective the first of the month they're eligible. If they do that, and they have that QHP, they're going to become eligible for Medicare, and they're no longer going to qualify for the advanced premium tax credits. But those tax credits, they might not automatically end. So it's important for the person who's getting into Medicare to call the marketplace and let the marketplace know that they're getting Medicare so they can update their coverage and tax credit information. And they need to drop their qualified health plan at least 14 days before their Medicare coverage is going to begin. That's because under the law or under the implementing regulations, the qualified health plan, you have to give them 14 days notice in order for them to disenroll you. I guess they could be nice and disenroll you if you gave them less than 2 weeks notice, but they don't have to. And what that means is if somebody waits more than the amount of time, they give less than a 14-day buffer, they could be stuck with, they'd have both Medicare coverage, but they could also then be in their QHP that next month and not be eligible for tax credits. So they'd have to pay a whole another month of QHP premiums without the tax credits that make them so much more affordable. Yeah, so that's basically that. Once you have Medicare, Medicare's primary. The QHP is secondary. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Beth Scheiken, who's going to talk about the transitions not from qualified health plans to Medicare, but from Magi Marketplace Medicaid to Medicare. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh. So Josh spoke about transitioning from QHP that one had gotten from the marketplace to Medicare, and I'm going to speak about people who have Magi Medicaid that they got through the marketplace and are transitioning to Medicare. So Magi Medicaid, as Josh mentioned previously, is the modified adjusted gross income here in New York. That is people who are at 138% of the federal poverty level or below, who are eligible for purchasing or for enrolling in this Medicaid through the marketplace. So again, those are, and I apologize, some of you probably may already know this information, but various populations are considered in the Magi Medicaid. People who are pregnant, infants and children under 19, people aged 19 to 64 who are not on Medicare. So there's a few other populations as well. But so these people are people who don't have Medicare that are able to get into the marketplace. Now, New York State has decided that people who have Magi Medicaid are authorized for a 12-month period. Now, these people are eligible for 12 months of continuous coverage, even if they become eligible for Medicare during this period. So it's still important to keep the New York State of Health informed about any income changes or, for example, your Medicare eligibility. But it's important to know that when you become eligible for your Magi Medicaid, you are authorized for a 12-month period. And then we want to go over a few steps that a client should take if they have Magi Medicaid through the marketplace and then become Medicare eligible, either due to disability, being in their 25th month of collecting Social Security disability income, or if they are turning age 65. So when someone who has Magi Medicaid becomes Medicare eligible, they should still enroll in Part A, the hospital insurance, Part B, the medical insurance, and Part D. And just as Josh mentioned, they should do this early in the enrollment period. And Josh explained that it's best to do that in the first 3 months of the 7-month period. So we are going to go over a couple of things that a person who does transition to from Magi Medicaid that was gotten through the marketplace to Medicare should do. So they should disenroll from, they're going to be able to call the New York State of Health to make sure that they are disenrolled from their mainstream managed care, because someone who has Medicare is not to be enrolled in mainstream managed care, and so they would request to be put into Medicaid fee-for-service. And then the other piece, which we're going to talk a little bit about, is that this population should also call the New York State of Health to request a reimbursement for the Medicare Part B premiums. Now, this is a little bit different than the Medicare Savings Program, and we're going to talk about that right now. So in order to illustrate this, we have another case study. We have Mr. F., who is 64 years old and lives in Jackson Heights, Queens. He is single. So he received Magi Medicaid, which became effective April 1, 2014 through the marketplace. And as I mentioned before, here in New York, you have a 12-month authorization period for your Magi Medicaid. So as we're thinking about this, he is going to be eligible for this Magi Medicaid to retain it for 12 months, regardless of if there's some changes in his eligibility. He still should be eligible for that 12-month continuous period. So he receives $1,010 a month in Social Security disability income. That's his only income, and he's turning 65 next month. So he receives a letter about his Medicaid and Medicare premiums, and he's somebody who, in thinking about having had since April, he's had almost for 6 months his Magi Medicaid. It's been great for him. He's really worried about, not having his Magi Medicaid and how he's going to be able to afford his Medicare come next month when he turns 65. So the question is, how can we help Mr. F? So previously, I think a lot of our minds would think, oh, let's help him by applying for a Medicare Savings Program and get him the MSP so he won't have to pay his Part B premiums. So for this population, The question of should we assist Mr. F with the MSP, at this point the answer is no, because he is currently receiving Magi Medicaid that he got through the marketplace. So the state has decided to go about this differently for this population. This population, instead of applying for the Medicare Savings Program, the MSP, they are going to be reimbursed for their Part B premiums by the state. So there's nothing currently set up in the system that will flag them as somebody who has Magi Medicaid, they're becoming Medicare eligible, let's enroll them in this reimbursement type program. So we have been, the recommendations being made by the state, and as advocates we're encouraging clients that they should call the New York State of Health, the customer service number, and let them know that they are now Medicare, receiving Medicare, and want to be reimbursed for their Part B premium. And the way this works is they will still see their Part B premium if they're collecting Social Security. They'll still see that $104.90 deducted from their check. But that month they will also receive a reimbursement check from the state. Now, if there's somebody who's not collecting any sort of Social Security, they will be billed for that $104.90, but also in that same month should receive a check for $104.90 as a reimbursement from the state. So this, could create some issues, for people who, having that $104.90 taken out early and then waiting for that check to come. But, those are things that we can try to help work with you, and you can be in touch with us to, try and figure out some solutions for that. We have, had clients that we've worked with that this is the way it's working in terms of they had Magi Medicaid, they became Medicare eligible, they now are receiving each month a check from the state for $104.90. And they are still seeing, though, it's deducted from their Social Security benefits, but each month they are receiving that check. So it is in place and seems to be working for people we've been working with. Now, something to keep in mind, this reimbursement will only be for the duration of that 12 months of continuous coverage. So in the case of Mr. F, when we were speaking about him, his coverage began April 2014, and so he is now becoming Medicare eligible next month. So he will only have this Part B reimbursement for the remainder, for the last 6 months of his Magi Medicaid coverage. So in continuing with Mr. F, his 12-month period of continuous coverage, as I just mentioned, ends in April 2015. There are some steps that we are suggesting he should do in order to make sure that he doesn't have any gaps in coverage and he receives any low-income benefits that he may be eligible for. So what we've been told by the state, and obviously this hasn't happened yet because nobody's reached the end of a 12-month authorization period yet, but what should happen is the person should then be re-evaluated for their Medicaid eligibility. And then as we know, someone who maybe received Magi Medicaid through the marketplace with the higher income levels now is going to be re-evaluated at the non-Magi income levels, which are significantly lower. So it's quite possible when they're re-evaluated, they may be found not to be eligible for Medicaid any longer. Now, we were told that then, so the person should be re-evaluated, and then if they are found not eligible for Medicaid, then the local district, or here in New York, HRA, will then evaluate them for the Medicare Savings Program. And they shouldn't have to do a Medicare Savings Program application, and it should all just happen while they're being reevaluated. However, just to make sure that we are covering all of our bases and making sure that these people don't suffer any, gaps in coverage or have any extra expenses, keep in mind that this person, when that 12-month continuous coverage is coming to an end, they should apply through their local district for their Medicaid with the help of, all of you, and then also apply for the Medicare Savings Program. Just keep these in mind. It's supposed to happen seamlessly, but, these are things that we haven't seen played out, so we should all be mindful of it. And we are happy at the Medicare Rights Center to help with applying for the Medicare Savings Programs. And any of these Magi Medicaid transitions to Medicare cases, we are trying to track them very closely at the Medicare Rights Center. And so if you have clients that are, transitioning from the Magi Medicaid and needing to request this reimbursement, or they're coming to the end of their 12-month authorization period, please be in touch with, Josh. You all have his information, and we will definitely try to assist you in any way and through the process. And then the question of, why take or keep your Medicare, people who are eligible for Medicare, as Josh said, they will need to pay the full QHP premium, and they'll also have to pay their Medicare costs. So, again, when you have Medicare, you're not eligible for the tax credits to help pay for the QHPs, and Josh mentioned they can be very costly and illustrated how expensive it can be. So it's really important that people go ahead and keep that in mind, because it could cause some additional expenses that they did not anticipate. Additionally, if somebody's thinking, oh, I have my QHP, it's great, I'm Medicare eligible, why do I need to go ahead? Keep in mind that if you delay enrollment in Medicare, you will have to pay a higher Medicare premium for the rest of your life. It's that penalty, which I'll review a little bit on the next slide. And then in addition to having to pay higher premiums, you'll also have to likely wait until the general enrollment period to enroll in Medicare. And also, we are trying to gather information from CMS about how QHPs will pay when somebody does have Medicare, and so or doesn't have Medicare. So there's really no guarantee that we know of right now. So if a person retains their QHP and decides, I'm not going to enroll in Medicare, there's no guarantee that the QHP is going to pay primary for that person. So even if, it could be the QHP might pay for a bit and then realize, they should be in Medicare, which should be primary, and try to recoup some of that money. So these are important things to remember. So I mentioned that if someone delays their enrollment, they will face a premium penalty. So that premium penalty for Part B, for every 12-month period that one that goes without their Part B, they will be assessed a 10% penalty, which is 10% of the Part B premium, so around $10, and that'll be for the rest of their life. Keep in mind, though, there is that population, those that have current employer coverage, they can delay their Part B, and then they are given a special enrollment period. But otherwise, if somebody delays their Part B for each 12-month period, they're going to be subject to this 10% of the Part B premium penalty, in addition to paying their Part B. So they'll be paying, here or in New York, or the 2014 Part B premium is $104.90, so they'd be paying that each month plus 10% of that. So, and it's for the duration of their life, which is a long time, hopefully. And then some things to think about in terms of that enrolling into Part B after your initial enrollment period or after your current employer coverage ends. So someone who has a QHP and decides to delay their enrollment into Part B, there is no special enrollment period. It doesn't work like employer coverage. Employer coverage, current employer coverage, a person has that, they can choose to delay Part B, and then they're given an 8-month special enrollment period to go ahead and get themselves enrolled into Part B. But for a QHP, that's not how it works. So someone in their QHP shouldn't say, oh, I'm covered, I have a QHP, it'll be fine, I can get my Medicare, when I feel like it. There will not be a special enrollment period, so they will likely have to wait until the general enrollment period to enroll into Medicare Part B. And that general enrollment period is January 1 to March 31st every year. And then once somebody enrolls in their Part B during that general enrollment period, that Medicare coverage won't begin until July 1. So a person who, stays in their QHP and delays their Part B will not only face penalties for late enrollment, but they might have a gap in coverage. If they don't take care of it right away, they will have to wait for their coverage to begin until July 1. Yes, Stacy.
What's the difference between the Medicare open enrollment that Josh mentioned in October 15th to December 7th and general enrollment?
Right, so that's a great question. So in terms of that annual open enrollment period that Josh mentioned in the fall, that fall open enrollment, that's to make changes to your existing Medicare that you have. So you're in original Medicare and you decided, oh, I think I'd rather switch to a Medicare Advantage plan. You can do that then. Or if you're, wanting to switch to you decide that your Medicare Advantage plan has the network's changing, or your formulary for your drug coverage is changing, you can make changes to it during that period. Now, during that fall period is when you would make your changes, and those would be effective January 1. This general enrollment period is an enrollment period for somebody who missed their IEP, their initial enrollment period, and they need to sign up for their Part A. Maybe they delayed it, they didn't do it. Their Part B, they didn't have it, or right. And then while they can sign up during that period, that January 1 to March 31st, it's still not going to be effective, though, until July. So people that have that use the general enrollment period may have a gap in coverage. Again, beneficiaries will pay that 10% for the rest of their life. If they, 10% penalty if they delay their enrollment. So there's some strategies for this, if you do enroll late into Part B, which someone may be eligible for. So we said we want to avoid having that penalty, and we want to avoid any gaps in coverage which could occur if you have to wait until the general enrollment period and not have coverage effective until July of that year. So one strategy for that is the Medicare Savings Program. And the Medicare Savings Program it has income limits, but here in New York we don't have any asset test or asset levels, but it varies by state. But if someone is able to enroll into the Medicare Savings Program, if they're eligible for it, that would be a way to get Part B, and they would not face their penalty. They would not. So in the Medicare Savings Program, their premium is going to be paid for the state, or premium will be paid by the state, as well as their penalty. They will not be subject to that. So the Medicare Savings Program is a great way to, help people if they are in this situation where they delayed enrollment and face penalties and are looking at just the GEP, the General Enrollment Period. Another option that someone can try is called equitable relief. And equitable relief doesn't, it's not a legal right, there's not a guarantee, but what it is it allows a person to ask Social Security, so they would write a letter to Social Security, to their local Social Security, and they would be asking them for enrollment outside of the, their IEP or outside of the GEP, and they would be asking for elimination of their penalty. Now, this equitable relief, the way it's looked at is the beneficiary has to show some grounds for why they are entitled to this equitable relief, and it's outlined that it must be due to a result of misinformation that they were given by an employee of the federal government. So if someone were to have gone to the Social Security office and, I would recommend take note of what date they went to the Social Security office, who they spoke with at the Social Security office, and let's say that person said, oh, you'll be fine, you can stay in your QHP, don't worry about it, you don't need to get your Medicare, you can delay as long as you want. So then they find out, they call and speak with one of you, and you think, oh no, we need to resolve this. They could, write a letter and send it to their local Social Security office saying, I spoke with Mr. So-and-so on this date at my local Social Security office. I was informed that I didn't need to enroll into Medicare and I would be fine in my QHP forever. So that may be grounds for equitable relief, and they would then ask, I'm asking to be retroactively enrolled into Medicare, and I'm requesting an elimination of my penalties. So Social Security doesn't have to respond to this, but we have seen successes with it. And the success is, Social Security will, if you have that information that you did go to the Social Security office, they will check their system. And they will see in the system, oh, yes, Miss So-and-so did call on this date, and she did inquire about Medicare. And so that might be grounds to assist with granting this equitable relief. Something else to consider is somebody who is now facing a late enrollment penalty. If they were under 65, so meaning they had Medicare due to disability or other reasons, ESRD or ALS, then when they turn 65, they are given a second initial enrollment period, and their premium penalty is erased. So I just had a conversation with somebody the other day, and it was, the best news they could have gotten, knowing now that they are facing a penalty for about 10 years, and she'd been on the phone with Social Security. She'd been, talking to so many different people, and when we were speaking, I told her, well, when you turn 65, you're no longer going to be subject to this Part B penalty. And she was like music to her ears. She had not ever heard this information. So that is something that, people who unfortunately, do have Medicare under age 65 will then no longer have the penalty once they do turn 65.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we know yet whether or not misinformation or being either misadvised or not fully advised by non-federal but federally funded, federally authorized sources, like, for example, a state-based marketplace would qualify for the
Yeah, I haven't worked on any of those cases specifically myself. I don't know if anyone else in the room has, but, I would say I would encourage a client to, proceed with requesting equitable relief. It can't hurt, It seems like, if it's possible that they could, possibly grant it that way, but I haven't worked with that or seen that sort of case, but that's true. That's true. I mean, again,
they say information anyway. Right. Well, they're not going to write down information they gave out or look at it later and say that's wrong.
Right.
So the marketplace doesn't control enrollment of Medicare.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, Josh, offhand, but I always, if somebody wants to try equitable relief and they've, got the gusto to go ahead and proceed with the letter, I say go ahead, but always letting them know that it is not a guarantee. It's something that just feels like they, maybe taking one more avenue to try and advocate for themselves helps empower them and feel like, I've tried everything. But it doesn't always work. So it just always makes sure that if you are recommending equitable relief to somebody, that you tell them realistically, the outcome may not be successful. So going back to Raymond, who Josh initially introduced us to in the beginning, so we've now talked about Medicare and the marketplaces, and we can probably answer Raymond's question. So the question of, does he need to enroll or disenroll from Medicare and switch to a marketplace plan? I see heads shaking no. So people with Medicare should not switch to a QHP. The marketplace is not for people with Medicare, and disenrolling may mean that the person will have to pay premium penalties or have gaps in coverage. And also the next question of, do I need to change or add my coverage because of the marketplaces? So remember, a person with Medicare shouldn't have to add a qualified health plan, nor are, if somebody has Medicare, any parts of Medicare, remember there is the law that they should not be sold a qualified health plan if somebody knows that they have Medicare. And, reminding people that the QHPs, they're expensive when you don't qualify for tax credits, so it wouldn't necessarily be beneficial to them. And then the question of our private Medicare plan, so his Part D, a drug plan or a Medicare Advantage plan or supplemental, Medigap, sold through the marketplace. Right now they are not, private Medicare coverage is not sold on the marketplace, so they still would, go directly through 1-800-MEDICARE or through the plans to enroll in that sort of private Medicare coverage. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Josh. Sure.
Okay, so I was looking at my clock, and I think we actually have just a little bit of time to talk a little bit about SHOP. So again, Beth and I have talked about qualified health, individual market qualified health plans, or QHPs, and those and how they work with Medicare. We've also talked about Magi Medicaid you get through the marketplace and how that works or doesn't work with Medicare. And the last kind of aspect of the Affordable Care Act health insurance marketplace is the shop exchange. It's for small businesses. This year it's limited to businesses who want to participate if they have 50 or fewer employees. The process for calculating how many employees there are, as Kyle explained at the training a couple months ago, it's extremely complicated, but generally speaking, it's small businesses right now who are in the shop. So for small businesses, or really anybody who gets shop coverage through an employer, the key thing to remember with regard to Medicare is that shop coverage is just like any other type of employer-sponsored coverage. So earlier in one of the slides we talked about somebody with employer-sponsored coverage. That's really the only exception to the requirement to enroll into Medicare Part B when you're first eligible, or into the parts of Medicare when you're first eligible. That applies if you have coverage through a shop plan. But the difference, or the exception to that, is that, as I said, shop is for smaller employers. And Medicare's rules about coordination of benefits, who pays first, who pays second, are such that for a lot of people who have Medicare, who have a small employer, their Medicare coverage is primary to the employer-sponsored plan. So if I'm 65 or older and I work for an employer that has more than 20 employees, or rather fewer than 20 employees, then Medicare is primary. And if I don't enroll into Medicare, my employer plans from an employer with fewer than 20 employees will not pay primary. So I may not have any coverage at all because I don't have primary coverage. Somebody who has disability-related Medicare needs to get Medicare if they have an employer with fewer than 100 employees. So by definition, because SHOP only has folks who are 50 employees or less, somebody with disability-related Medicare is not going to want to wait to enroll into Medicare if they have SHOP coverage. It's only people over 65 this year who might consider safely delaying enrolling into Medicare Part B, and they would only want to do that if that SHOP employer-sponsored plan has more than 20 employees in the employer. We don't really have to go into the case example, but if you folks ever want to give me a call about specific SHOP-related scenarios, then we can go through them. But the key thing is that the only people who shouldn't enroll into Medicare when they're first eligible are people who have Medicare who are age 65 or older, and it's through a SHOP plan that's through an employer that has more than 20 employees. And again, the same enrollment rules apply for the Part B. You have a special enrollment period if you qualify for it. If you had current employer coverage, you have to use it. You don't want to get left out the cold if you miss your enrollment period. So I'm going to move through this. Okay, conclusion. Medicare and QHPs. So we're talking about individual market QHPs. We talked about how you get them, who's eligible for them, what kind of marketplace tax credits you can get to make them more affordable, and the fact that once you become eligible for Medicare, you need to take Medicare because you lose your eligibility for those tax credits, and that could be very painful because you could have to repay them up to a certain amount depending on your income at the end of the tax year. You might have to repay them all. You might have to only repay some of them. But if you keep collecting them after you're eligible for them, that could be a bad situation. So enroll into Medicare during the first 3 months of your initial enrollment period. That's the 3 months before the month you get Medicare. You're eligible for Medicare. Remember, people don't get automatically enrolled into Medicare. If somebody has a SHOP marketplace plan, then again, the only reason not to enroll into Medicare when first eligible is if they have Medicare because they're 65 or older, and the employer has 20 or more employees. As Beth was mentioning earlier with regard to interacting with Social Security, if any client here has a SHOP plan and they're becoming Medicare eligible, even though we are certain of this information, we have confidence in it, we've received it from the federal government and other sources, you still want to call Social Security. And the reason for that is that if something goes wrong, by calling Social Security and getting the name of the person you talked to, the date and time of your conversation, and what you said and what they said back to you, you can protect your rights, or you may be able to. Okay. Medicare and Magi Medicaid that you get through the marketplace. Magi Medicaid beneficiaries who don't have Medicare yet, they can get it through the marketplace, and they're protected by the 12-month period of continuous eligibility. This 12-month period of continuous eligibility begins when they're determined eligible for Magi Medicaid by the New York State of Health Marketplace. That's different from when they turn 65 or become eligible for Medicare. So if I am determined this month for Magi Medicaid, I go through the State of Health and I get a determination, then I become eligible for Medicare in December. My 12 months begin this month, not December. So keep that in mind. Somebody who becomes eligible for Magi Medicaid or for Medicare after getting Magi Medicaid needs to call the New York State of Health and request disenrollment from Medicaid fee-for-service in disenrollment from Medicaid mainstream managed care into Medicaid fee-for-service to pay secondary to Medicare for services that Medicare covers. They also, during that same call, want to ask for reimbursement for Part B premiums. Again, as Beth mentioned, this is a newer process, and it is happening and working for some of our clients. But it's difficult, and some people will have trouble affording having $104, the Part B premium, deducted first from their Social Security check or being billed for it and then waiting for a check back in the mail. There are some strategies to help with that, especially if somebody's not yet collecting Social Security. They could ask Social Security to only charge them 1 month at a time, because by default people are charged 3 months at a time for Part B if they're not getting Social Security. Give me a call if you want to discuss some of these strategies, but generally speaking, it'll be deducted and then they'll go back. They'll get a check back in the mail. So at the end of the continuous eligibility period, we really need to make sure clients work with advocates, navigators, post-enrollment personnel to make sure they apply for and are enrolled into all the programs they're now eligible for. These programs that are non-Magi or SSI related is the technical term programs, they have income and asset limits for Medicaid, but they only have income limits for the Medicare Savings Program. So there are a couple different programs, and we can help folks enroll in and apply for the programs through which they may be eligible for, even though the programs they're now eligible for, once at the end of their continuous eligibility period, they could be different. So thank you for all your time today. I'm really glad that everyone came out and is able to be on the webinar and here in person. Take down my email or phone number. You may already have it. Email us, give us a call, and ask questions now. Okay.
So you mentioned earlier that if people only have a Part B,
Right.
and that doesn't qualify as the qualified health plan.
Right.
So what happened is a lot of new immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have 40 season of credit,
Yeah.
so they don't have a Part A, they only have a Part B. For
Right.
some reason, they don't qualify for Medicaid either, so they only have a Part B. So those people could still go through Marketplace to buy insurance, right?
Yes. No.
No?
So the question was whether or not somebody who has Part B only but not Part A can get a qualified health plan from the marketplace. And the issue is that person you described who came here to the U.S., they're over 65, but they don't have the 40 working quarters, they are still eligible they still have Medicare, so they can't just buy a plan through the marketplace. And they have a part of Medicare. They have Part B, so they're not eligible for Magi Medicaid through the marketplace. But what they could do is go through us and apply for the QMB program, the Medicare Savings Program, to have the state of New York pay their Medicare Part A and Part B premiums and get them other coverage to help with their prescription drug costs. But they can't get something through the marketplace, especially if they already have Part B.
So we translate to you guys.
I'm sorry?
So we translate the client who like QMB to you guys, and
Yeah, give me a call and we'll help them.
I have one more question. Just
Sure.
to clarify, if a new immigrant who's only been here for less than 5 years, Are they still eligible for Part B?
No, and they also couldn't have Part B either.
Yeah.
They can't have any part of
They have to be
Medicare, and they
at
can't
least
have
for
Medicaid.
5 years.
Yeah. So when basic health program rolls out, those people will get a lot of help from that. But right now they could get advanced premium tax credit through the marketplace. So to clarify, folks, you're eligible for Medicare either if you meet the working history requirements or if you've been in the United States continuously for 5 years and have a green card, or you're a citizen. And then the 5 years doesn't apply. But in that 5-year waiting period, it's a 5-year waiting period for all federal health care programs. Federal health care programs are Medicare and Medicaid, but not the advanced premium tax credits and the QHPs. So people in that 5-year bracket can qualify through the marketplace.
That's because they're not eligible for Medicare at all.
Right. Exactly.
There's no 5-year bar for Medicare. What is it? There's no 5-year bar for Medicare.
Not in New York
Not
State.
in New York
Right.
State.
Not-
So then they can't go through the marketplace.
I have one
If
more
they
question.
already have Medicaid.
So
For the
immigrants,
federal, for the
Medicaid works with federal funding and state funding, right, and county funding. So the federal government doesn't participate of the Medicaid funding for people who have been residents less than 5 years. But in New York State, they are eligible, funded by the state.
so immigrants who are here under 5 years, they qualify for Medicaid, but they don't qualify for the tax credit subsidies.
Yeah, but if they have Medicare, well,
They don't have the Medicare because it's under 5 years, right?
If they have legal status, they will qualify for APTC or Medicaid in New York, regardless of how long.
So they could qualify for the subsidy,
Yeah, they could.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, under 5 years.
I
Okay, got it.
have one more clarification. Marketplace actually told a client she is a U.S. citizen. She was born and raised she lived here, but she moved abroad. So she never really paid taxes. So when she returned, she was 65, she couldn't get Medicare because she hadn't worked here enough and never paid taxes. Then they told her to take a QHP. Told her because it would be more expensive for her to buy Part A and Part B. And she couldn't get APTCs because her income was too high.
Okay.
She got a full price QHP, which is her only insurance.
Yeah. So for a very limited number of people who are not in the lower income range, folks under 400% of the poverty level, or many of the people we work with have even incomes much lower than that. Then there are a very limited number of people who might want to not enroll into Part A, Part B, or Part D and get the marketplace qualified health plan. It's really a case-by-case basis. She should call Social Security before she does it. She will be subject to late enrollment penalties for Part A, too, because she has to pay a premium for it, and Part B and Part D. But these are very, very limited situations. But yes, that is the situation that Beth and I see. We do have callers who have high incomes who don't have a working history in this country. And so, yeah, if you have to pay a premium for Part A, you could do that.
and what is best to do in those situations is what we've done with do cost-benefit analysis. I mean, you really see, if they have to pay for their Part A, if they have to pay, if they have high income, they have to pay an additional IRMA for their premiums, which due to high income. And then, taking those cost compared to what they have to pay for the QHPs, it's really, and then it's, they'll see what makes more sense. Does it make more sense to pay the high cost for all their Medicare, or does it make more sense to get the QHP? And that's, how we've been able to assist people just, do the math with them, and then let them make it, informing them on what they'll be subject to penalties if later in life they decided, I need Medicare.
Or if they decided they got those working quarters later on. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions?
So we got a few questions via webinar.
Okay.
We got time to take about 1 or 2 questions. The first one says, what if the 14-day notice to the qualified health plan falls in the middle of the month? Does the consumer get refunded for some portion of their already paid monthly premium bill?
I think it needs clarification. No, the disenrollment from the QHP would take place the first of the following month, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a month-to-month basis. They're not going to prorate it to HME's premium.
Okay. Next question. How old do you have to become eligible for Medicare?
Okay, so you can get Medicare if you're 65 and older and meet the residency requirements, or if you are under 65 and, generally speaking, if you're collecting disability income for 2 years or more.
Okay. Next question. What about the client who is not eligible for Medicare, never worked, never paid into the system? Can we help them? And this is a question from a navigator. So can they enroll on the marketplace?
So we'd have to, if they have no part of Medicare, they can apply for marketplace coverage. But as far as not eligible for Medicare, I want to clarify the word eligible because there are different types of things you can be eligible for. You can get Medicare and buy it if you meet the residency requirement. You've been here for 5 years and you have a green card, or you've been here less than that and you're a citizen. They might think, or based on an interaction with Social Security or somebody else, that they're not, quote-unquote, eligible for Medicare, but they might actually be eligible. They can buy Part A, they can get Part B and Part D, and if they're eligible for Medicare, then they have to enroll, or they will face late enrollment premium penalties for all parts of Medicare. But that being said, if they're not eligible for Medicare, then they can go to the marketplace. They might not qualify for tax credits, depending on the income. Again, it might be like Ayaz's client. At the same time, a lot of the folks who call us who never work, they might not have that much income. They might have very little income. And so if they're not, it's not that they're not eligible, but they're not eligible to get free Part A, and so the Medicare would be cost prohibitive to them. It might be better to look into a Medicare savings program to see if there's a way to get them to qualify for that, to pay for their Medicare Part A, B, and C premiums.
All right, great. And we'll do one last question. What does Medicare Part B cover?
So Medicare Part B is arguably the most important part of Medicare, and it's also, I think, without any much argument from me or my colleagues, the most complicated part of Medicare to get into and to avoid complications and rolling in and penalties. So Part B, it's the type of health insurance you and I use most. It's not prescription drugs, but it's everything else that you get outside of being hospitalized. So a doctor's visit, physical therapy outside the context of a hospital, lab tests, x-rays, durable medical equipment. It runs the gamut. Most things under Medicare are under Part B. Like maybe 55% of spending is Part B and Part D. So, yeah.
And in addition, sometimes people, when they think, oh, well, if I go to the hospital and be covered if I only have Part A. When you're in the hospital, Part A will cover your hospital stay, but there will still be parts of your hospital services that you receive, the doctors that are covered under Part B. So someone who thinks, oh, I go to the hospital, I only need to use my Medicare in the hospital stay, and they only have Part A, they still will likely run into not having Part B.
All right, great. Okay, well, we want to thank Josh and Beth for coming in and doing this excellent training for us today. They did excellent work. We still had a few questions. We'll answer those questions via, we'll email you, or you can email me any questions. This is Leon from CSS. So thank you, CSS Navigator Network, for joining us on this training today, and thank you, Josh and Beth. Thank you.
Yeah.